about the hormones, the glucose, because it hits so many topics all at the same time. So you always have to be comfortable with sickle cell anemia and protein structure and mutation, because they love to ask that same thing because it hits multiple topics. And then this is another question that they commonly ask. So that should have taken care of 6A. Now, as long as, man, my throat is not very powerful today. As long as 6A was, the 6B it's just a tiny question. So 6b says thyroid. Yes.
Oh, you're not presenting it.
What? Which? Okay. Then I will take care of it. He's like, first he exams, now he forgets the camera. Stay on me, Abiles. Watch me. Oh, that's not fair. Great. Even my computer has political OCD. Look, it's coming up to me here. Mitch McConnell. Go away. Go away. My cookies are out of control. There we go. Okay, cool. 6B. 6B says thyroxine. Thyroxine is secreted by the thyroid gland. So your thyroid glands, there's two of them. They're about 3, maybe 4 centimeters long. 4 centimeters, pretty big. About 3 centimeters. They sit on each side of your trachea here, and what they do is they control your metabolism. So if you have a really active thyroid producing high levels of hormones, then you have a very active metabolism. And whereas if your thyroid puts out low levels of hormones, then you have what's called a slow or inactive metabolism. There's no good news and bad news. There's advantages and disadvantages of each. So 6B says thyroxine. That's the hormone. That's one of the hormones that's secreted by the thyroid. Says that it's secreted by the thyroid gland to regulate metabolic rate and help control body temperature. So what we're looking at here is 6B. Thyroxine is secreted by the thyroid gland to regulate metabolic rate. This is what most people call your metabolism. Okay, so when we talk about metabolism, usually people only think digestion. So be aware. So this would be 6B. Put that up like that, and let's sneak this in like this. What's the deal? The night ride was cold. There it is. All right, so metabolism. This is where I jokingly called makers and breakers, okay? What your metabolism is all of the reactions that occur in all of your cells. That's all, okay? Your metabolism, you are both making molecules and you're ripping them apart, okay? So when you talk about metabolism or your metabolic reactions, there are two types of metabolic reactions. Happen to recall what they are?
Catabolic and anabolic.
Totally agree. Catabolic and anabolic. Okay. Catabolism, or to catabolize, is digestion, ripping molecules apart, whereas anabolic is synthesis, production, right? You're taking all of molecules that you consume in your food and you're doing one of two things. You're either ripping that apart down to the high energy electrons to make ATP through the different steps of cell rest, or you're taking those building blocks and you're assembling them anabolically to make other molecules. Now, I jokingly call this, good morning, makers and breakers, but would you ever, ever, ever put makers and breakers on your exam, ever?
Nope.
Nope. Okay, this is totally Manro slang, okay? At the same time, sometimes students struggle with anabolic and catabolic, whereas makers and breakers rhymes and they're familiar terms, but please use anabolic and catabolic. So the hormones that control the rate of these reactions, the main hormone that controls reaction rate here is called thyroxine, and it comes out of the thyroid glands that sit on each side of your trachea. Tremendous amounts of chemistry here that we are just kind of saying, yeah, there's a lot of control here, and there's a lot more to this. But what they're trying to introduce you to is more hormones besides just testosterone and estrogen. There's also insulin, and there's glucagon, and now you know about thyroxine. Okay. Then for 6c, then they talk to you about leptin. And same thing. These are cursory mentions of these hormones. There's a tremendous amount of chemistry behind these, but right now that's not the point. When you get into human biochemistry, the chemistry it's just, there's so much and it's so cool, but it is way beyond the scope of this course. And so what they're trying to get you to realize is that when we talk about hormones, all too often when we talk about hormones, people think testosterone and estrogen, and there are about 30 different hormones, each with their own metabolic pathways, and there's a lot going on. So 6c, they want you to know about leptin. And the way that you can remember what leptin does is it's Greek, from leptos, which is Greek for thin. So leptin is a hormone that is involved in the metabolism of fat. Okay, those good old triglycerides. So 6c says leptin, secreted by the cells in adipose tissue, acts on the hypothalamus of the brain to inhibit appetite. So if I have high leptin levels, how will I feel? Full. Whereas if I have, I should change colors, if I have low leptin levels, how will I feel? Hungry. Okay. So sometimes when someone has a voracious appetite, when they eat all the time, could that be the result of thyroxine here? Yes. If they are hungry all the time, could this be the underproduction, the hypoproduction of leptin? Yes. Could these two work together? Yes. Okay. So your metabolism is quite complex. Okay. And so then it talks about adipose tissue. And what you have to understand is that adipose tissue stores fat. And it's a very, very simple, extremely simple tissue. Adipose tissue is nothing more than a network of very, very thin, hollow cells. That is adipose tissue. Okay? And once you form it, you then fill these cells with triglycerides, or what I will just generally use as fat, like such. So let's say that I gain, I don't care how much weight, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds, whatever, doesn't matter. I gain some weight. I then put out more energy than I consume, so I'm exercising. When you exercise, never stop eating, ever. Okay, so I start exercising, I start burning energy. If I'm burning energy, I start removing the fat from the tissue. But here's what's interesting. Once I remove the fat, does the tissue stay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. This is why it's so easy to gain weight. Okay. Because the savings accounts, the tissue that stores the fat are always there. Okay. People talk about, wow, the fat just comes right back. Yeah. Any extra energy that you eat is simply converted into triglycerides, the high energy electrons, stored in the tails of the triglyceride, and stored right in the adipose tissue. This is your savings account. And genetically, we are programmed to store energy. It's an evolutionary advantage to quickly and easily store fat. So that way, if you go through a reduction in resources, you are carrying your own nutritional resources with you. Okay, so gaining fat is a very natural process. It was actually an evolutionary advantage to our ancestors. Okay, the only time that fat is dangerous, I don't want you guys to think fat's bad. Fat is energy storage. Okay, you just have to be careful with your family history. If you have access to your biological family members, find out if you have a family history of high cholesterol, if you have a family history of triglycerides, if you have a family history of heart attack, okay, or aneurysm or embolism or stroke. Be aware of these things because you need to change your behavior, your diet, your exercise routines based on your family history. You got to be sensitive to this stuff, okay? And then you have to be aware that when you carry high volumes of fat, obesity, especially in Hispanics, that leads to type 1 diabetes, and that shortens your life expectancies. You got to be careful with that, right? And then carrying 30-40% body fat for 10, 15, 20 years starts to clog the arteries in your heart and can cause heart disease, heart attack, and death. Okay, so all these negative things with fat. At the same time, don't be afraid of it. Fat's delicious. Okay, but you have to be, it's moderation. You got to be careful with it, right? And if you think, but I really like that, if you're going to eat a lot of it, you got to exercise. Okay, you got to burn that, right? So that is then 6C. So 6B and 6C are pretty quick. They're introducing you, giving you a very snapshot picture at your metabolism that is controlled out of your thyroid gland through thyroxine in 6B and leptin in 6C. Cool?
Cool.
Cool. All right. 6D. It then says a melatonin, where's pen? 6D says melatonin is secreted by the pineal gland in the brain to control circadian rhythms. All right, 6D. Oh, melatonin. Your generation has taken what melatonin balances usually do in the brain and you just scattered them because of the wavelength of light that comes out of our phones, okay? Have you seen how there's a setting, a nighttime setting on your phone that you should activate, by the way? Do you know why you activate that nighttime setting on your phone? Do you have any idea?
So like the blue light will make us awake, basically?
Yes, exactly. Okay, that wavelength of light, that's beautiful that you guys know that. That wavelength of light stimulates your brain because it tells your brain that you're getting high doses of sunlight. Okay, that then changes the hormonal balances in your brain and actually stimulates your brain and tells your brain biochemically it's daytime. Increases your metabolism, increases the synthesis of neurotransmitters, and makes you more lucid, more awake. So you're sitting there at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning trying to go to sleep, but I'm going to look at one more thing on my phone. What you're actually doing is you're biochemically activating your brain. Shut it down. Okay. Now, if you still want to look at your phone, even though you're trying to go to sleep, you've got to use that nighttime function. You've got to reduce the wavelengths of light that tell your brain, because that's all your eyes are. Your eyes are just an extension right out of the front of your brain. That you have to tell the brain it's nighttime and not be telling the brain that it's daytime. So there are these things called circadian rhythms. And again, there's a tremendous amount to this. We are simply mentioning these things. This is like the rock bouncing over the surface of the water. Rhythm. Rhythm is an interesting word to spell. There you go. It's a 7-letter word with only one vowel. Circadian rhythms. What are these? These are sleep patterns. And they are based on melatonin from the brain. Settings have been totally disrupted by the telephone because People are constant input, so they're in a constant state of stimulation. And because of my age compared to yours, I understand what it was like to not have a phone. So I very much feel the stimulation of the computers, and then the lack of stimulation, whether it's a laptop or a phone or a television. It's all a screen. It's the same thing to your brain. And so the concern with your generation is that input from the screens is your normal, right? And what people will do is they'll be on a laptop, especially now, they'll be on a laptop and like, oh, I need a break from this laptop, and they'll go to their phone, right? Or Em and Ariel, they will be on laptops all day, just like you and I, and they come downstairs, and then Don and I, we'll have dinner, and the four of us will have dinner together, and usually we would watch some TV show at night during dinner, and they're like, you know what, the last thing we want to look at, another screen. So be aware that the input that you're getting from a screen, regardless of the content, okay, is still neurological input to your brain, still impacts the concentration of melatonin, which affects your sleep patterns, which are based on what we call circadian rhythms, which used to be based on the sun. Okay, we are genetically prepared that when there's sunlight, our hormone levels come up, and when there's darkness, our hormone levels go down. And when there's sunlight, they come up, and when there's darkness, the hormone. And so your hormones do this through the day based on light from the sun. Okay. However, if you don't use the night function on your phone, you're holding a little piece of the sun in your hand, and you're constantly giving your brain sunlight input, and so your hormone levels do this until you are exhausted and you crash. Then you get up in the morning and like, oh, I'm so tired. So what do you reach for? Stimulants. Okay, stimulants for most teens are either sugar or caffeine, or sometimes both. Okay, thus you have a whole industry of Red Bull and Monster and all of these other specialty drinks that are really nothing more than three things: water, sugar, and caffeine. Okay, why do individuals need water, sugar, and caffeine? Because they're screwing with their circadian rhythms with the amount of electronic input they put into their brain. Biologically, it's that simple. I know I totally sound like an old adult, and biologically, it's accurate. Okay, so what you want to do to be able to have more control over your sleep patterns is reduce visual input. And what you can also do is establish a pattern of behavior that you consistently do before you go to, okay? Whether that's listening to music, whether that is reading a book, whether that is drawing, whether that is journaling, whether that is, I don't know if you have a pet, or whatever. There's some pattern of behavior that you consistently do. And by repeating that behavior every time before you sleep, when you start that behavior protocol, is what it basically is, that will affect the hormone levels in your brain, and it makes it easier for you to fall asleep. These are simple. Of course, at a time when you're doing this and this and this, and you're on the laptop all the time in college, and so on. When you're about 25, things will settle down. Maybe we'll see. Supposedly. All right, so that's melatonin in 6D. All right, then 6E. 6E says, annotate a diagram of the female reproductive system to show the structure and their function. So, female reproductive system.
Mr. Monroe?
Yes, ma'am.
Question for 6D.
Mm-hmm.
When people take too much melatonin to sleep, why doesn't it actually cause them to sleep? Why does it make them wake up?
Because depending on how much you take and how often you take it, do you remember when we talked about the smooth ER? And do you remember one of the functions of the smooth ER is to produce lipids? Fine. But the other thing that the smooth ER does is it metabolizes, it breaks down molecules that are in excess. So if someone takes too much melatonin, they simply get the production of smooth ER, especially in their liver cells, and they will simply metabolize the excess that they're taking. That's why it doesn't have any effect. They build a tolerance. That's where tolerance comes from. Tolerance comes of any compound, whether it's Advil or Tylenol or alcohol or melatonin. Any excess excess will be broken down by the smooth ER in your liver cells. Liver's cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the female reproductive system, we could go just all day with all of the structures, and we're only going to concentrate on 6. And they're the 6 that we drew back in, that would have been core 2, when we talked about the blastula and the blastocyst and the invagination and gastrulation and all that kind of stuff. So labia, vagina, and cervix, uterus, oviduct, and ovary. You call it an oviduct, not fallopian tube. On the exam, please, please, please use fallopian tube. That is considered slang. Also use the term uterus, not womb. Womb is also considered slang. Okay. So use the specific names, please. So I need to get some labels here. There's the picture I'm looking for. Where's the female structure? Really? You only have the female cut in half? Oh, that's not fair. Why would I not have? Oh, I know why. It's over in your other notes. Hold on a second. The female reproductive system, it's image 46 something. Which image is this? 4610. That had neuron top. I probably buried it in your neuron notes. There's the diagram I'm looking for. So I have drawn this for you multiple times, but of course Cam's a little bit better. Maybe just a touch. Go there, and there will be the male. There, that'll be that. There. Good grief, I need a bigger desk. It's just, my stuff just expands. Where I work, it just expands to the bigger area. All right, so externally, there are 2 layers of tissue. There's 4 labia total. The larger structures are the labia major and the labia minor. These structures are meant to protect the opening of the vagina. So you have the labia, then you have a muscular tube, some to the birth canal. You will not call it that, the vagina, because that's what it is. This is a muscular tube where the child will one day pass through if you decide to have children. You then have the structure here, the uterus. Uterus is an amazing organ. In the female, if she is not pregnant, your uterus, ladies, is the size of your fist. Bigger the female, bigger the fist, bigger the uterus. But that does not for the baby. Smaller the woman, smaller the fist, smaller the uterus, but that does not mean the size of the baby. And once the child fills, then that stimulates contractions, and that will then stimulate birth. So in some families, you have physically small women who consistently have premature babies. Why? Because their uterus is reduced in size, but genetically their families make big babies, and so they'll give birth early. So the of the uterus here, and to the, you know what, this red on red doesn't work for me. Use black. Do this. That's much better. I'm used to working with a black and white copy. There we go. So the opening of the uterus here, this is called the cervix. E-R-V-I-X. So the cervix is the opening of the uterus to the vagina, okay? And this is what they test for during a pelvic exam of a female who is sexually active, because there's a virus. There's a virus called HPV, human papillomavirus. And as you know, viruses have receptors on them. And the receptors on HPV are specific to the receptors of cervical tissue. So when HPV or when cervical tissue is exposed to HPV, the virus invades these cells and turns the cervical cells cancerous. Therefore, HPV is what we call an oncovirus. HPV causes cervical cancer. Now, HPV is also a sexually transmitted infection and causes genital wart. You've heard that warts are caused by a virus. Ta-da, here's one example. However, the wart female are the least of your worries because it causes cervical cancer. So males can carry HPV, males can transmit HPV, males can harbor and hold HPV. However, males don't have cervical tissue. Therefore, if a male is HPV positive, he is asymptomatic. He has no symptoms at all. Why? Because as a male, I don't have tissue. So once a female becomes sexually active, they will do something called a pap smear, based on a gentleman. I should know his name. This gentleman, I should have done this earlier. Who is the doctor for the pap smear? I will down so I know it's next year. Not what doctor. Why am I for pap smear? Okay, I'll do this. Pap smear is named after whom? I can see his face in that. Okay, pap smear named after. There it is. How do you like that name? Papa Nicolau, Papa Lou?
I think it is Papa Nicolau.
Papa Nicolau, yep. Ladies, this guy was a leading virologist and gynecologist, and he is the individual that discovered the correlation between cervical cancer and HPV. Okay, so and I should write down his name so I have that every year. Of course, I didn't write it down. Georgius, what a great name. Any of you know how to properly pronounce his first name? Georgios? Oh boy, how would you say that?
No idea.
No idea? Okay. G-E.
I think the way you said it was correct.
What, me, really? A Caucasian who's actually got it. Okay. That's it. Papa Niku. Lalu. Oh boy. It sounds Hawaiian, but obviously if you look at him, he appears Greek. Papanikolaou. Can't imagine why I couldn't think of that off the top of my head. So what he did was he came up with a procedure, a very simple procedure, as a matter of fact, where they use a small device and they go in and will culture the cervical cells, okay? And what they do you remember when we were freshmen, did your cheek cells, right? And we took the toothpick, put it on your cheek, then we took a drop of water and dye on the slide, and then we mixed your cells with the water and the dye, and we visualized, we looked at your cheek cells under the microscope, maybe, hopefully. It was a long time ago, hopefully you remember that. Okay, same idea here, okay? So they collect the cervical cells, and then they go in and they put the cervical cells here, and then to lower the density of the cells, they take a cover slip and they smear it, okay? And why smear it? So you can then see the individual cells across the slide, okay? Because typical cells have a pretty uniform shape to them. I don't know if you remember seeing your cheek cells, but typical somatic cells, they're not perfect little spheres. They look kind of like this. Okay? Now, someone who studies cell shape, because shape tells you about cell health. Okay, so that the person who studies cell shape and thus cell health is called a pathologist. And when a pathologist studies the cells, they then give a pathology report. Okay, so if they take a sample of your cervical cells, it takes about a week for you to get the results back, and you get cells that are typical. Awesome. Well, then if they see cells that are what they call atypical, these cells start looking a little unusual or non-typical, and their shape starts to look like this. These are called, oh, it looks like a little mouth. Then the atypical cell shape like this. Okay, because when cells turn malignant, their shape looks like this. Cancer cells morphologically are ugly, and they look very jagged and elongated, and cancer cells look like that. Okay, so a pathologist is trained to recognize in cervical tissue, well, in all cell types that they're trained on. They then learn the difference between typical, atypical, and malignant cells. This would be a cancer cell. So the pap smear is only on females that are sexually active, because they've then been exposed to males who could be asymptomatic, because we can carry human papillomavirus, HPV, which doesn't affect males at all because we don't have a cervix, we don't have cervical tissue. So they go in, and if you're sexually active, they collect these cells, smear it on slide, and it's called a pap smear after Dr. no, I put my notes away. It's the pap smear, okay? So that's, now there's now a vaccine for the TexU from the top 3 most common forms of HPV. It's called Gardasil, and Gardasil's been out. Oh, let's see, that was right before M was born. So Gardasil's been out since about 98, 99, 2000. And Dawn ran those studies extensively in the late 90s and early 2000s, right before that vaccine hit the market. It was really funny. She would come home and she would talk about the studies, and I couldn't say anything in class because that information is highly confidential and protected and all that kind of stuff. And then once they finally got FDA approval, she's like, you can talk about it now. It's about time. Super cool. All right, so then that is the uterus, cervix, and vagina. If you then keep going, you get the oviduct. Oh, let's label it on the left. Let's do this one here. People commonly call this the fallopian tube, but you will not. That is the duct that carries the ova. Thus, it is the oviduct. And then you have the ovary here. The ovary is about the size of the last digit on your thumb. It's about that big. They are snow white. So when you see the ovary, if you ever Google that, it is snow white. It's really cool. Now, sometimes students get confused because they're like, Manra, what's that? Okay, that is the ovarian ligament. Okay. Shut up, really?
Yeah.
Holy smokes. You mean the sun changes over time?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put that in my notes for sure. Thank you. This right here is called the ovarian ligament. Okay, that is not the oviduct. Okay, what this is this is a piece of connective tissue. There's one over here too. This is a piece of connective tissue that anchors the ovary. Okay, because the ovary sits here, and then the opening of the oviduct is like this. And so the ovary and the oviduct are not physically connected. They're just really close to each other. All right. And so when the ovum is, the ovum literally floats across into the opening of the oviduct. Well, if the ovary wasn't connected by a ligament, the ovary could migrate all around the body cavity, right? All of a sudden her ovary could be way up here by her liver or way up here by her stomach and a long way from the opening of the oviduct. So the oviduct is anchored by this ovarian ligament, which is here. But this is not the oviduct. It's connective tissue that holds down the, okay? Now, a common question that I'll get, have you ever heard of a female having her tubes tied? Have you heard of this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a form of surgical birth control, okay? And so what a lot of people think is that the dog goes into the oviduct and loops it around and single knot and double knot. Now you got your tubes tied. And course. That's ridiculous. That's not the way it works at all. What really happens is they go in to the oviduct and they cut about a 2 to 3 centimeter section out of the oviduct, okay? And since you are removing a piece of tissue, that is called a ligation. And since you are removing the oviduct, which is tubular, it is called a tubal ligation. And then, of course, they do it to both sides. So when you see the surgical notes, they will refer to it as a bilateral tubal ligation, because, of course, you would do this on both sides. So if a female decides to surgically sterilize herself, well, not herself, if she decides to be surgically sterilized, she will have a bilateral tubal ligation. The doctor will go in and excise the tissue, and this part of the oviduct is no longer present. She keeps her ovaries. Of course, she keeps her ovaries for the hormones. You pull out a female's ovaries, you will instantly put her in menopause, and there will be a very, very harsh hormonal adjustment. You don't do that to females. If she wants to be surgically sterilized, you take out her oviduct. And so she still ovulates, except when she ovulates, the ovum will then reach where the oviduct is then sealed shut, okay, because they cauterize this tissue, and the oviduct can't get to the uterus to then implant. If she then has unprotected sex and the male inseminates, then the sperm then also rise up through the uterus, come up to the oviduct where the other end of the duct has been sealed, and then the sperm can't reach the ovum. Okay, so she still ovulates, she still menstruates, but she's been surgically sterilized. This is reversible, kind of. They can insert a connector here, and so if this is the connector, it'll be made of silicone. They then reopen the oviduct and put the oviduct around the silicone tube. And then here's the delicate part. They have to put a clamp here, okay? But if you put the clamp too tight, it'll compress the oviduct tissue, cause neuroses of the tissue will die, and the clamp will fall off, okay? But if you leave the clamp too loose when she's active and her body cavity bounces, then the oviduct will slide off. So you have to get the clamp just tight enough to hold the tissue, but not so tight that it kills the tissue, and just tight enough to hold it, but not so loose that the oviduct becomes disconnected. So this is reversible. It's delicate. Okay. Now that's different from a hysterectomy. A hysterectomy is where they take out her uterus. Okay. The advantage of taking the uterus out is that means that she no longer builds up endometrial tissue, which means she doesn't menstruate anymore, okay? So that can be good news. The bad news is there are hormones that are produced by the uterus, and so this tends to induce menopause regardless of her age, and there can be some side effects, hormonal side effects to taking the uterus out. But sometimes a female, she might be hemorrhaging, she might have uterine node, she might have uterine cancer, and so they have to pull out the uterus. Okay, so that's the female reproductive system, which was I think that's question 6D, isn't it? There's some piece paper on here, 6E. Okay, and they hold you responsible for those 6 structures. There's that.
Oh, Mr. Renner, do you want us to talk about these individual terms like on core?
Yes, because then what IB tends not to give you that diagram. Of course, I'm saying that diagram, which is a terrible term to use. I've got too many paper in front of me. There it is. They tend not to give you this one. They tend to give you the bisection. They tend to give you this one, which is hard. Okay, that's why they do it. All right. So I would be able to take this structure and this structure and label it. Okay. They don't ask you to draw it. There's no way they would ever ask you to draw a bisected female, ever. Okay. But they will give you this diagram and ask you to label it, which is what we will do right now. Let's do that and that. We'll do male next. There and there. All right. So we need So we'll do labia, urethra, clitoris, bladder, uterus, ovary is tucked right in there. This is oviduct, just like that. All right, so they've taken a female here, they've turned her sideways, and they've cut her in half, okay? She's pretty pissed. So you have this outer structure here. What they're actually showing you here, these are the labia major, not that you have to know that, like such. You then have the vaginal opening, so this is the vagina that we will label in just one second. Now, in front of the vaginal opening is her urethra. The urethra is the tube that leads out of the urinary bladder. So she does not urinate out of her vagina, not even close, okay? You have the vaginal opening, and then above that, you have the urethral opening. You then have a bundle of neural tissue called the clitoris. What's interesting is that the tissue of the labia and the clitoris, in males, the labia becomes the tissue of the scrotum, and the clitoris becomes the tissue of the penis. You can't have hermaphrodites in humans because you have one mass, what we call gonadal tissue, that develops into the shaft of the penis or the clitoris, one or the other, but not both, okay? The tissue either differentiates into the labia or the tissue of the scrotum, one or the other, but not both, okay? Then above the urinary bladder is, of course, the uterus. Then tucked back in here, you've got this kind of orange structure sticking up. That's the ovary. And then here's the tube off of the uterus here, and that's the oviduct, like such. And then if you go the other way, you would then get the opening of the uterus here, that's the cervix. Then this is the end of her large intestine, that's the rectum. Then the opening of the rectum, which is the anus, and then the vaginal opening here, like such. Squeeze it in there, there we go. So this is the cervix. And then you have the rectum, which is the last portion of the small intestine. I don't know why I made these lines so long, but I did. This would then be the anus or the opening of the rectum. And then this is the vaginal opening or the vagina, like such. Okay. And so IB will then take the female, cut her in half. They will not ask you to reproduce this image. And this is a structure function question. What is it and what does it do? Now, the cervix that they show here as having kind of a cup shape as she goes through her gestation, her growing of the baby. The base, if you were to look up the vagina and see the cervix looks like this. And as the baby grows and the uterus goes from the size of your fist to the size of a watermelon, it's amazing. The cervix starts to flatten out. It's called effacement as the cervix is like that. And so during the 8th and 9th month of pregnancy, the cervix, it usually has a funnel or kind of a cup shape, starts to flatten out until right before she gives birth, it flattens out, and the doctor can then look through the vagina, and if she is fully effaced, then the bottom of her cervix looks like this. Okay. Now, have you heard of a female being dilated? Have you heard of this?
Yes.
Yeah. She starts going through labor, and they check her dilating. She's dilated. She's dilated. What are they talking about? Do you know what's dilating?
Open up.
Yes, the cervix is dilating. It's opening up, just like your iris dilates when you're in the dark, right? Your iris opens up. That cervix has to dilate. Do you know how much the cervix has to dilate before they ask her to push him out, shove him out, way out? How much?
10 centimeters.
10 centimeters is the size of a softball. Okay, your cervix that right now looks like that right? It's an opening which will dilate to 10 centimeters, size of a softball. Because if she's only dilated, let's say 4 centimeters, and you're only this big, and you try to drive, I'll grab this off. If you try to drive a softball through that hole, what's going to happen to that tissue?
Break.
Yes, it's going to tear, and she could hemorrhage. Really, really dangerous. So she has this overwhelming urge. I want to push, I want to push, I want to push. And the doctor say, don't, no, I want to push. Don't push. If she pushes too early and tries to drive that softball through the cervix will tear, and she could hemorrhage. And that is really, really dangerous, okay? So they are constantly measuring her dilation because it has to be 10 centimeters. They'll go, oh my, a softball, you're out of your mind. You ever seen a newborn?
Yeah.
About how big is the size of their head?
Really big.
It's decently big.
Yep, about the size of a softball, okay? And so when we talk about this in class, I actually kind of enjoy talking about this in class. You're amazing, thank you, right? I did not mean for that to be a hint. M's in the kitchen. I'm like, gee, if I only had a softball. No, it's not what I, so that was not meant to be passive aggressive. I'm not like that. Okay, so people sit there and go, oh my God, Manro, I'm going to push that through my cervix. And I go, if you have, and you go for vaginal birth, all right? However, this is the least of your worries, right? Because there's a song. Do you know the song?
Head, shoulders.
Amen to that. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. Head, and if you don't know, there's a song. It goes head, shoulders, knees and toes. Knees. Now, I know squat about art, but I know that if you look at the proportions of a human being, do you know the proportion between our shoulders, the width of our shoulders, and the size of our head?
It's 3 heads.
3 heads, please. The width of your shoulders is 3 size of the diameter of your head. So when we talk about the cervix, and we talk about effacement, and we talk about dilating, and I say 10 centimeters, and I say a softball, and you can seriously, when you present this in class, you can see the females. Don't worry, gentlemen, I'm going to make you wiggle tomorrow, right? So, female sitting, okay, this is least of your worries, because after the baby crowns and you get the head through the cervix, hey, guess what's coming next?
The shoulder.
Shoulders. Well, if the head is about 10 centimeters, how much are the shoulders?
20 more.
That would be 20, 25 to 30. You got a 30 centimeter baby coming through that. Okay, thus modern pharmaceuticals and painkillers. That's why females who do natural childbirth, man, my hat is off to them. I've had some broken things on my body, and the pain was tremendous. And I think that compared to birth is nothing. So what doctors will commonly try to do is they will try to get one arm out first. Babies are commonly born like this. Okay, they're kind of doing the Superman thing, so that the doctor can get the shoulders at an angle. Okay, because if you tip the shoulders at an angle, it reduces the diameter that they have to fit. Because to take that bulldozer of 30 centimeters of shoulder through that cervix can be super, super uncomfortable for the female. Just saying. All right, so that is an absolutely beautiful place to stop. Now that we've totally ruined the song of head, shoulders, knees, and toes for all of you for the rest of your life, you're welcome. And now you'll never look at a softball quite the same way again. You sit there and you go, hey, and you'll see the ball, and all of a sudden you'll go head, shoulders, knees, and toes, and then you'll giggle, and they'll say, what are you giggling about? And you go, well, see, cervix, and it effaces, and you go, never mind. You will think about this class at the most amazing time. Okay, so we picked a date for topic 6 and 7, which was the 27th, I think, somewhere. It's in a couple of weeks. So we did 1 and 2 this week. We'll do 3 and 4 next week. Then we'll skip 2 weeks and do 5 and 6. Once we finish the male reproductive system, we will talk about in vitro fertilization and the morals and ethics with that. There's a great TOK discussion there. Oh, it's really cool. And same thing. I will present both sides and say, here's one side, here's the other side. They're both right. You need to figure out how you feel about in vitro fertilization and the blastula that they make and that are extra. And it's a great discussion. And then,
Ya voy a terminar.
I'm sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize my mic was on.
No worries at all. Frida doesn't say anything for 6 months, and then she just randomly just jumps in the middle of class, which is awesome. And then I will see you all tomorrow, and we will have guest speakers in a couple of weeks. So have a great Thursday.